apparently you guys couldn't hear me at all earlier. I don't know if now this is resolved. It's always funny to do those streams and deal with so many sources of video and audio. So maybe I just wait for the thumbs up about that when you can hear me talk. So apparently you guys can hear me talk. So let me start again by this. So my name is I guess it, so I get closer to my laptop mic. My name is Arthur Hnatek, and I'm streaming from Zurich in Switzerland. And talking earlier, while you guys couldn't hear me at all, about using sensory percussion to basically perform a track that you have created in the studio. And this is usually how I go about when I write music, is I make performance, the recording in the studio using a bunch of layers, and I usually don't really think too much about how this is going to be performed. And then I go to perform that piece, and I usually enjoy having a lot of random aspect about it, and kind of thinking more about a rendition of that composition, but more about a live remix situation. So I thought I would share with you, basically you heard the music, hopefully, earlier, that was playing in the background. This is my new track called Euclid Heat. And I use this song and create stems out of it, and then I add a bunch of other aspects, and sensory percussion is basically at the center of all of that, translating the acoustic drumming into a bunch of other things. So yeah, why don't I stop this talking right now, head to the drum set that's over there, and then play, and hopefully you guys are still here after all the the live stuff. Anyways, let me change the camera, and I will see you very soon. There we go. There. I hope you guys could hear this. I mean, if you couldn't hear me talk earlier, at least I hope you could hear some of the music that had just happened. I hope. I didn't get any warning of any kind, I guess, on my phone, so should be okay. Maybe I was thinking I might play a bit more. Um, yeah, apparently I should. There you go. Should try to talk a bit louder or get my mic going on, but I just checked. The gain is cranked, so no idea. Anyways, in order to talk a bit about the setup, I thought I would just briefly mention what's going on, and then maybe play a bit more, and then we'll do some talking together with Tlakael. So, anyways, so what I wanted to say is the way I use sensory percussion is almost as kind of like the central agent to all my different instruments, because effectively my setup is almost like a bit of a modular setup. I have a modular synth, but I also have a bunch of other things, and basically sensory percussion is providing all information that can feed to so many different places. And this is kind of probably my favorite aspect about this technology, is I can use information about drumming and then feed this to a bunch of different places. And that means using, of course, acoustic drums. So I have a lot of sounds that are coming straight from a normal drum set. Of course, that information from sensory percussion is also being fed to my modular synthesizer. So there's a lot of things that I was using earlier that are actually information that comes from the drums that I can modulate the sounds from the synth. Then, of course, I have my sampler within the sensory percussion software, and all my sounds are already there. But I also have Ableton and some of the basically the stems of some of the production of the tracks that I'm making in the studio. So basically, and on top of that, I tried today to include a bit of the visual aspect by having sensory percussion basically feed MIDI information also to this software called Mat Mapper. And that is, that also comes from sensory percussion. So basically, it allows me to use the drumming to be the main source of basically modulation and information that I can then feed to the rest of my setup. And so, yeah, I just thought it would be good to mention this right away, because it is a bit of a hybrid setup that I'm using most of the time when I perform. And that was going on in that track, you know, using elements from the original song, using improvisation on the spot basically, and blend all that together thanks to sensory percussion. So yeah, I might just jump back in, do another song, just change my presets, maybe load a different visual, and then do another jam, maybe a bit shorter. This way we not running out of time. Again, same principle. I'm using one of my tracks from my album. I'm running this through a bunch of plugin and sound design things. This way I can just create new sounds that have nothing to do with the original tune. And then I go and use this live. So let me switch back to this, and I will see you very shortly. So I'm muted now. there we go. That was a shorter one. Just yeah, to feature a different sound, but basically the same principle. Even though in that song I was actually using almost none of the actual original stems, from Ableton. It was all just the Sunhouse sampler, the software, and modular synth and acoustic drums. So yeah, I think ready to wait now. There you go. And let me switch to. There it is.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
how's it going? Yeah, I can hear you.
Good.
Um,
I hope I'm trying to talk slightly louder than usual.
I'm I'm wondering if the Zoom feed is a better volume than
Yeah, maybe it's that. I have no idea if there's a way to boost the actual laptop mic, and hopefully there'll be a whole discussion about how you do that. But
they're reporting that I am about 3 times louder than you.
really, okay.
Mhm.
So I'll try to balance this out. But that's funny. I have no idea why that's the case. But yeah, just keep letting me know what's going on.
Well, hopefully I'm not blasting people's ears out when I talk, but that was awesome.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, cool.
Yeah, that was really really cool. Um, I think it's really fun to see like sensory being used in this like more dance genre like area. It's not exactly, I don't know, techno, but I'm not like an electronic music genre knowledgeable person, but it sounds like um what I want it to what I like would want to listen to in electronic music, which is like um I don't, it reminds me of like that, that Villa Lobos record with the Max Loderbauer, the ECM
Of course, yeah,
rechop
yeah, totally.
one, where like especially in the first track where it's like these it's like real timing and screwing of like sounds, but then it still has this beat. It's, I mean, it's much more dancing than that record is, but it's like it's beautiful and really amazing to watch like actually happen live, because that music is so studio focused and like it's so layered and worked over, like a painting, but this is like we're seeing it like actually happen live in this really amazing way. So just you know my quick thought on like you know how it sounds to me, but super fun to watch.
Yeah, that's it's cool to hear, and I'm happy it comes out this way because that's definitely. Yeah, let me know if there's some feedback that I can do anything with the audio. But
I think you're still a bit quiet, but I don't know what we
I
can
mean,
do there.
I'm boosting it as much as I can. Hopefully, I don't know. Yeah.
You know what I think it is?
Yeah. Tell me. You know.
It's a Zoom, uh, like like they're two feeds, and it's like trying to avoid um, what do you call it? Feedback.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
So
Sure.
there's like somehow feeds are getting mixed on your side. Maybe it's a monitoring thing. You need to turn off. You need to monitor from one or the other or something. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Right. I didn't think about that. That could be the case. But
But let's hopefully it's not too unbalanced and we can just keep going.
okay.
Um,
I guess what I can do is turn you down
uh,
and then get people to
yeah,
blast the
that would.
volume.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
I'm okay.
It's fun. I mean, it's fun. It's the live situation. It's cool.
Yeah,
So
this is
if it's
really live. In case anybody thought we were just like pre-recording, and it's like,
no,
no, that would be easier. So yeah, let's get into some of um, some of that music. Um, I guess you know approaching dance music like this from behind the drums. I guess how are you thinking about it in terms of like dance music is so loop based, it's so grid based. It's kind of like this. I feel like a part of dance music is the fact that it is a machine and it's going, and you can like lean on that fact when you're listening to it. And when you're doing it live, it's like I don't know, there's this, it brings this completely different element to like your experience of um, rhythm and time. I just wanted to hear just some thoughts of like what it's been like for you to listen to dance music, start incorporating it, and actually like perform it.
Hmm. I mean, it's a super cool question. It's definitely not a question where I have the feeling I found um, much answers about, because it's an ongoing thing. For sure, it comes from the fact that I really enjoy some of that more club dance music driven stuff that's been uh, made, you know, and that's a style of music that I listen to. And sure, most of the time this is not using live drums, and definitely not live instruments in some way, you know, even though we could argue about this. But the fact is, this is a bit of the point, you know. It's like it's a music that I enjoy. I spent quite a lot of time as a drummer, just acoustic drummer, kind of trying to get into that world, you know, just with acoustic stuff, you know. This is something that I really always enjoyed, seeing people that are able to create this mix with this electronic aesthetic and sounds with maybe a more jazz centered attitude, you know. So no matter what, even before electronics or even trying to play, this was always something that I was interested in. And it also comes from the fact of like, man, you know, have you ever tried put a mic on a cool kick drum and blast out in a good PA? I mean, it's incredible, the feeling of playing as acoustic drums that's heavily amplified, and it just shows you like, yeah, you can actually sound like a drum machine, at least in terms of volume and impact. Um, you can have similar yeah, impact on a PA. And so this is, it also comes from that. So you're like, oh wow, I love this thing, and so much of my of playing is not necessarily driven by extreme levels on acoustic sounds. And so I really enjoy this kind of being like, okay, I want this to feel like it's a DJ, but I want it to still come from something that I can improvise on the spot, you know. And there's many people that have done that already, but it's still something I'm trying to figure out. And definitely playing solo is such is such a yeah is such a challenge to try to bring this attitude, I guess. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna adjust my camera, but so ignore this for a moment. But
No problem.
uh, I'm curious how if you have always been into like doing electronic music production, or if you came to it. I know you've what I know about your background is like you stick and played drums for a long time, but I'm curious about your how you got into like electronic music production and stuff. Maybe you could just talk a bit about your journey through a little bit.
So if I just answer that electronic part, it just came from discovering, you know, being pretty interested in let's say, it's hard to describe, but grid grid based music, you know, stuff that is very quantized maybe in a way. That was always, even in acoustic music, a sound that I was interested in, and that came through, you know, very intricate jazz music that has like very odd time and complicated rhythms and very sharp style of playing. So I was always into that, even as a. And then I discovered basically Aphex Twin. That was one of the first um, artists that I discovered. That was basically providing me a bit of those both things. You know, it's this intricate production thing, but also just super crazy rhythms. You know, and as a drummer, you hear this and you're like, you're challenged by it. You know, and so that was basically my entry level of that, more of that complex, uh, very very crazy rhythmical style of music. That was my entry into electronic music. But in general, you know, I come from Switzerland. I was born in Geneva, in the French part of Switzerland, and very quickly got more into jazz. I think mostly because of my teacher, who was a jazz player, and he was really like, this is where you can learn a lot of stuff, and went through the whole stuff. And it got really serious when I moved to New York. Actually, I was living in New York for almost 5 years. I studied at the New School and went
Mm.
through the whole jazz routine of like moving there and being very focused. Even though, the whole time I was at jazz school, when I went back home, I was listening to Aphex Twin and Square Pusher and a lot of this electronic music that had almost nothing to do with what I was being taught. And very quickly I realized there's a lot of people in New York that are doing this. And definitely discovering Mark Juliana and
Mm.
taking a lot of lessons with him in New York. And him, basically, I remember very clearly this moment. He told me, "Hey, if it's this, that's the music you're listening to, that means that there's something there. Even though when I was going to play with other people at school, they were like, "What? You don't what? You have to know all standards, and you have to do this and learn the jazz tradition." And I was really challenged by it because I realized, oh wow, I need to do this homework. But Mark is the first guy who also told me like, check it out and learn this stuff, but also think about what is close to your heart a bit. And it sounds very simple, but I needed someone to be like, hey, it's totally fine to get a kick out of like more simple music. And that came this whole electronic dance music thing, which ultimately people could hear and be like, yeah, that's more basic music, more simple in rhythmical forms. But yeah, he was very instrumental to be like, this is this is totally fine. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And Mark's awesome. Yeah. I mean, we could probably talk for a long time about like the historical lineage of jazz music to Motown to Detroit to house to techno
sure, of
to
course, yeah,
Berlin, etc. Um, and how there's like actual real, um, you know, aesthetic grounding between. And for me, I feel like that was part of the driving force of like how to like drummer. Maybe you can relate to this experience of like learning this instrument, and a lot of it is about learning the craft of the actual how to extract sounds out of these physical objects. Like jazz is all about this, and that's what a lot of what that craft is, teaches you is like how to speak a language through all the sounds you can get out of these physical objects. And so it's a lot of it is about sound manipulation at the acoustic level, and that's ultimately what playing an acoustic instrument is about. But like the drums really highlight that, because you take away the tonal elements, you end up with like this kind of timbral language of sound. And when I started listening to electronic music, that's what I heard. I heard this kind of same level of sound manipulation. It sounded like jazz drums to me. Like when I would listen to Aphex Twin, and in particular, like there's this Negrid where he's doing this crazy pitch shifting stuff on this drum loop, and it sounded like a Brian Blade solo to me. And I was
yeah,
like, this, like, I want, like, how do I make the drums now? How do I actually do that? Because there's something that also comes with the ability to manipulate frequencies at that level with electronics that you just can't do on acoustic instruments. So I was wondering if, like, leading into the question of like how you came to censor, does that like resonate at all with you? Like that like the limitations of the acoustic instruments, but all similarities between drumming is about and what electronic music production is about.
yeah. I think you're totally right. Everything you just said is very on point. And this this thing that drives, yeah, I guess this quest for sound, and for sure to also start leading to that second question or first question you had about sensory percussion. It was always when I started deciding, okay, this is separate of my drumming. Making electronic music and doing this quest for this is happening separate from the drumming. I really, for some reason, for some years, really believed those things were separate. Which again, it's a
Mhm.
funny why did that happen? But you know, it was maybe based on the technology that was happening at the time, or it was just based on my own knowledge of you know, I was like, oh, Ableton, and I was spending a lot of time trying to make electronic music from just software, you know, and computer, and it's funny. It took me a second to realize all those years that I spent learning the drums, I could actually apply this project, you know, I have on the side. And so, for sure, when you guys developed that incredible technology, got it first, and I think also, yeah, saw Ian Cheng use it in such a special way. I was like, oh wow, there's actually to blend all those things and to make it that you don't have to separate those worlds all the time. Because I was actively producing music, electronic music, without using my drum set at all. And
Mm.
I think what you guys created is incredible because it just showed, yeah, you know, those two things could happen at the same time, you know.
Mm. So um, there's a couple questions on YouTube, more specifically about like your process and with Sensory and Ableton. I think basically comes down to like how do you manage between the live improvised elements and the more structural predetermined stuff? Is anything predetermined? Like where's the how do you approach that, and like
Yeah.
where does it land for you?
I think that's the ultimate question. Again, we've been talking about very in depth. There are also things that I'm thinking about all the time. You know, um, I have the feeling that I've been going through the spectrum and I'm constantly balancing. Even within a one set of music, I'm actually balancing through it all the time. You know, because there's an aspect of your you know, your sense to think no, it should be prepared, and you have to have like a lot of things under control that it sounds always a specific way. Even though it's funny that you would think this in the context of electronic music, because when I play with a band, a jazz band, this is the last thing I want. You know, I really don't like this at all when people are like, we have to define everything before the concert, you know. So with what I just performed, maybe I can just start with that
Yeah.
example. It was actually more on the spectrum of like not deciding anything. So basically providing a setup where more of a situation and a context where you can then you can feel free and know where it can go possibly, and then just kind of roll with it. So that means a lot of risk taking, you know. And I think within a concert, a full concert, I tend to have a few spots. Try to think about where I can apply those spots of what I just did, you know. So that means in Ableton maybe have a loop that is pre-recorded or pre-programmed or whatever, something that you know you can get to if you want, but also define that the intro section of that should be completely free and should be only based on, in that case, only a few sounds. There's actually not a lot going on within the sensory software, you know. So it's like having a few sounds that you can perform and then play around that, and then know that you can always drift into that thing that you know it's solid and is right. And then also see, I actually had for the first part of that jam, I had a B section too. I could at all times click there and go to that separate loop, but I actually didn't this time around. So it's
Mm.
just, it's not that I decided to, that I didn't, you know, it's just on the spot. It's like, no, it makes no sense now to jump to that B section. It would make no. So I'm always trying to, and I've done shows that are 100% improvised. I actually did one in December in that club. It was like a late night thing. It was like 1 a.m. and I knew I could play for an hour. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna show up with a bunch of sounds and just see where this goes. And it was fun, but there were moments where I was like, ah, I wish I could lead into a thing now. And there
Right.
and the other side is also possible. You just plan it all, and it's all super prepared, and then you have a bit less fun, I think. So
So how does that
yeah.
how does that work between like how you have things set up between Sensory and Ableton? Are you using a lot of scenes and timeline stuff, and then are you using Sensory just for MIDI, or are you using like the sampler and Sensory, and like what is a little bit more of the details of
The detailed
the
stuff,
setup?
it's actually both, but there's always in Sensory quite a lot going on with samplers too. I think actually, and that is usually what I tell people when they, I get to talk about sensory percussion a lot after shows also, because people always come to you after concerts and are like, how is it possible? So there's always a talk about it, and I usually, yeah, this is kind of like my favorite aspect is your sampler, like the the engine behind how you can trigger a sound is so advanced, and it's so easy to use, and it's so such, yeah, I don't know. That's my favorite part about it. So yes, in Sensory, there's actually quite a few samples, but there are almost never samples that are doing drum sounds, you know.
Mm,
So that means there's never a kick drum sound in
mm,
Sensory, There's never a clap or a snare. There's almost never drum sounds. That's because I have the hybrid setup. I decided
right.
that all hi-hats and all snares and kicks and blah blah, they will always come from acoustic sounds. And that was a
Wow, that's
process. I actually went through it quite a lot. I used
mhm.
to have, the real acoustic drum plus a sample in Sensory. And I was working with this sound engineer live for concerts, and he was telling me that sometimes it was like almost too much. You were basically blasting sub stuff all the time, and he was like,
Right.
yeah, think about putting a kick drum, like hitting the kick drum could actually trigger something that has nothing to do with low frequency stuff. And so this is what I'm trying
Hmm.
to do now. All the samplers, they actually don't hold any drum sounds. They only have those glitchy, weird, I don't know, melodic or not or very abstract sounds. And then all the things that come from, I have in Ableton, it's running with a timeline. So that means a click track. I'm actually not using the click sound, but it's there. And in Ableton, I have all the stuff that is kind of like looped in a way. So that's the pre-recorded stems. Sometimes they're very short. Sometimes they're actually very long. But yeah, everything that's kind of timeline based is happening in the session view of Ableton. And in that case, again, it was only one or two clips. It was not a lot. And
Hmm.
the rest, the rest comes from samplers. And then the modular synth can add this other kind of more acid touch to it, and more random aspect to it. Yeah.
Hmm. When it comes to like navigating through a timeline and like launching loops and stuff, are you doing that from the drums, or are you like clicking? You mentioned a click earlier.
Yeah, actually, I have a little. I also went through a different kind of setup situation, but I do have a little MIDI controller that is almost acting as a mixer. So that means I have like faders to enter my stems. So it's almost like I had a DJ mixer there, and it has like the regular. It opens sends into reverbs and delays.
Oh, cool.
It has a filter. So there was a bit of that happening, and then I have one button that is basically going to the next scene in Ableton,
Oh,
and
okay.
this fires
Cool.
off changes of kits in Sensory, and yeah, it's also providing um, it's the basically the BPM to the modular synth. Yeah,
So you have a record, Swim.
yeah,
Um, how what was the process like for recording versus approaching the live stuff?
yeah. That's definitely the what I'm always working on. The stuff that I'm putting out right now. I actually put out two songs recently in the last few weeks, and there's some more that will be coming out in the next coming weeks. And this was actually recorded a while ago, like almost more than a year ago. This music, and it was basically based on the fact that I needed to try almost to approach making music as like a, yeah, almost like a singer. I was
Hmm.
like, I was okay. I'm gonna produce music in my computer with using only sounds that are not drums. So do never program any beats in my Ableton
Mm.
stuff. So that means bass lines. I used a lot of analog instruments that I have. Just make a song that has no beats, and then bounce all of that and go into a recording studio, and as if you were like prepared to like lay in the vocals. But in that
Hmm.
case, I was laying only drums, acoustic drums.
That's
So I
really
didn't
cool.
I didn't bring any electronics that day, and so at the end it sounds like electronic music, but it's actually all the kick drums are real kick drums, all the
That's
hi hats
awesome.
are real snares, and so it is quite far from being able to perform that in that way because we like the kick drums are going through distortions and crazy outboard gear, and it was like a heavy. How can we mic the drum set to make it sound like an electronic instrument? So that was the process of that EP that's coming out now, and I'm more and more thinking like, no, let's reverse now the way and approach it more with like the live setup. And this
Hmm.
is would be one of my challenges to be like, let me write pieces, be able to perform them, and then record that, and that's the final version, which is something I've almost never done up until now.
That's
So
cool.
yeah.
That's awesome. And we have some links down in the description of
Yes,
uh, of these
definitely
projects. So
that new song that came
to
out.
everybody,
That was basically part of what I was playing and what was playing earlier before you guys couldn't hear me talk.
that's awesome. So what is life like these days? What are you doing in terms of like perform? I mean, touring's not happening, I'm assuming, in Europe as well. So how are you approaching you know, I guess your music right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I went through crazy phases. There was for sure some sadness and some disappointment with not be able to go on tour. I was definitely supposed to be traveling quite a lot. There's this piano player from Armenia called Tigran Hamasyan that we recorded his new album almost a year ago, and this was supposed to kind of come out. I mean, there's actually a single that came out the other day, but everything was gonna supposed to come out now. We were gonna go on tour in the U.S. I was probably supposed to be in the U.S. kind of now, and
Mm.
then all summer, a lot of jazz festivals. And so for sure, when all of this kind of like disappears, there was first of like a sense of like yeah, a bit disappointment, but very very quickly actually there's another feeling of like almost being relieved that I could have all of a sudden all that time, and especially also this feeling of purpose, that was quite strong in Switzerland, I must say, where a lot of people were instantly being like, you know what, this is our job now to like stay at home and really treat this thing super seriously very early on. So there was this feeling of like, you were doing the right thing by not going on tour and not so
Hmm.
this feeling kind of went away very quickly. I was like, you know what, no, this is what we have to do as a society now, is treat this thing super seriously and not be sad because you're losing a gig. So of course there are a lot of problems that come with it and financial questions and all of that, but I was very lucky that I was really instantly relieved by the fact that this is correct what's happening. So why not, make music? And actually, I've never made as much music as since the lockdown started. I've really,
So you've got had a lot more time to focus on swims.
yeah, for some reason it created some space and some kind of like some calmness and I just got to it slowly and used a lot of more sensory percussion actually to record music, and used a lot more of my own drum stuff, very simple, and just a bit more do it yourself, rather than thinking I have to go to the studio and do this. And then all of a sudden, I basically have a new EP ready as of now, even though the other one is not even out. It went very quickly, and I think that came from the fact that it felt like the right thing to do, to just take a second, step back, and work on some music. So again, this whole situation is super crazy, but I feel super thankful that I can have some time, to do more of my own music. So.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we're coming up on an hour, so we should probably wrap it up. But
Sure, of course, of course.
so you want to just shout out once more the projects you have coming out and the stuff you want people to check out?
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you have a second, why not listen to Euclid Heat, this song I put out. In June, I'll be putting out the whole EP. It's gonna have a vinyl, so this is exciting. It's the first time I do a vinyl of my own music, and I was able to partner with a super cool label here in Switzerland and really cool graphic designer that I admire. So it's all good. And then the yeah Tigran has this new single out that just came out a few days, and I've been crawling a bit under an avalanche of like Instagram stories of like a lot of people wanting to talk about it. So I'm very happy that this music is out. And yeah, I also want to thank you, and the whole team of Sunhouse for just first of all creating to have the idea of doing those streams. I've been really enjoying watching the other ones and looking forward to the next ones too. And also just yeah for creating such a beautiful, intricate, and fun technology that we can all use. You guys are incredible.
Thanks. Thanks, man. Well, thank you for performing for us and also for taking this and actually making something with it, because it's the artist to actually make it mean something. So thank you for making such amazing music with it. Yeah,
My pleasure.
great. All right, well, thanks again, and can't wait to see you play live at some point
I hope so.
back in
Yeah.
New York or wherever. So all right, man, take care.
You too. Have a good day.
All right, bye.